Well, thank you for coming out this morning. And, for some, this is an uncomfortable topic, but also a very important one. It's something that I talk with folks regularly in our office. So I'm Jackie Bedard, the founder of Carolina Family Estate Planning. We do estate planning and elder law. I like to say we help folks plan for the second half of life so that their family's not scrambling in times of sickness or death or unexpected circumstances. And one of the things that we're working with regularly on our clients is talking to them about healthcare directives. Things so if you become incapacitated in the future, who's going to make healthcare decisions for you? What sort of decisions do you want them to make? And there's several different documents that we use to accomplish capturing those wishes. We start with things like a healthcare directive or a healthcare power of attorney, where you appoint an agent that could step in on your behalf and help make decisions for you if you can't make decisions for yourself. But then we usually supplement it with some additional documents. Things like a HIPAA authorization. HIPAA are all those privacy laws that come up in the medical world these days about who your doctors can talk to and share information with. So we want to make sure that your family doesn't run into unnecessary roadblocks trying to communicate with your healthcare providers. And then there's things like your living will, which is where you indicate any wishes you have regarding end-of-life scenarios and treatments you would or would not want. And we also go into other things like long-term care scenarios and how you feel about different treatments. And one of the things that I run into regularly with clients is when we start talking about these issues, it's an uncomfortable topic, and a lot of people will want to just sort of generically say something along the lines of, I don't want to be on a machine like that person I saw in the news or something to that effect. And, I try to explain that that's really not always very helpful guidance for the family. There's a lot more involved. And so a while back, I was reading this book called Being Mortal by Atul Gawande. It was, I think, on the New York bestsellers list. It's been out for a couple of years now. And so he's a surgeon from the Boston area, and he was talking about the aging process in the U.S. and the dying process and how doctors haven't always received training about how to talk to folks about these issues. The families aren't prepared for these discussions, and, some of the things that we could do to maybe help aid that conversation. So I'm actually right now working with some other elder law attorneys nationally on what has been dubbed the Death and Dying Project, for us to really talk about how can we help our clients better think about these issues and prepare them for these conversations that might need to take place. And so along the way, I reached out to Transitions LifeCare and said, I would love to partner together on a presentation. I'd really love to hear your perspective more from the medical side of things about what are the issues that you run into with families? Where are they unprepared? What are the things that you wish they really knew about these conversations? I know I've read a lot of studies saying that people wait too long to seek out hospice services. And the statistics actually show that those that receive hospice actually tend to live longer. So how can we get that message out to folks? So I really appreciate Cooper coming out this morning. He's going to share his perspective and some information from Transitions LifeCare. I know he shared with me that he has some personal story that he's going to share and why this is a really important issue to him. So with that, I will turn over the stage.
Well, good morning. Nothing makes folks more nervous than to hear the guy from hospice is here. So we'll try and make it not too bad, and we'll try and not cause heart palpitations by PowerPoint. Transitions LifeCare used to be called Hospice of Wake County. We do a lot of things besides hospice now, to include palliative medicine, to include pediatric care, to include caregiver support work, which is something that Jackie Bedard has been intimately involved in, and she, to toot her horn a moment, has been on the board of Guiding Lights, the local caregiver support program. That's another nonprofit. So these services are available as really as community outreach supported by our community, and it's that sort of thing that gets us talking about this today, not because we think everybody in the room needs hospice care. So let me start off with, I do work there, but I think the real reason that I'm here is because I'm a person who has advanced directives. The first legal document that my wife and I ever put together was not a marriage certificate, was not a will, was actually our advanced directives. Because we have both worked in industries where we saw that, we've had personal experiences, and we wanted to know that someone was going to be speaking on our behalf in the event that we couldn't speak for ourselves, and to know what our wishes were. I've also, good or bad, been in a situation, actually multiple situations, where I had to use advanced directives with my own family members. And thankfully, those documents were in place. We knew our family's wishes, and we were able to follow through on their wishes. But I've used those documents and have been on the side of sometimes having to challenge some decisions that were going to be made, because fundamentally we were going to honor the wishes of the person who filled out the documents. So the question is often asked, well, what's the urgency? Well, the urgency is you don't know when you're going to need them. If you knew when you were going to need your seatbelt, you probably would only wear it then. Unfortunately, we don't know when that's going to happen. And so we encourage folks to go ahead and have them in place. They hurt nothing. They do no harm. They don't empower someone to do something to you, but they do enable someone to do something for you later on in the event that you need help. There's often a concern that we're going to give up some control by filling out these documents. Well, these documents are powerless until you've lost the ability to speak for yourself. So you're really not giving up any control at all. What you're really doing is ensuring that you have control and influence in the future when you're unable to speak for yourself. You're essentially creating a surrogate for control in the absence of your own ability at some point in the future. And they're revocable at any time. That you have the same capacity to create them, you have the same capacity to dissolve them, and it's very simple. So let's talk about something really uplifting. How do you think you're going to die? Because my wife grew up on Hatteras Island. I was driving out there not too long ago, and I was driving through East Lake. I don't know if y'all are familiar with East Lake, but when I went through that area, I pretty much doubled the population just by driving through the community. It is populated primarily by bears, and it got me thinking, what are the odds I'm not going to make it out of here? It turns out it's 1 in 2.5 million, so I didn't have a whole lot to worry about. Lightning strikes are 62, something like that, out of 2.5 million. We went for a walk on the beach. I'm not sure. I saw that Sharknado thing, and that got me nervous. But shark attacks, turns out that's only 2 out of 2.5 million. The reality is, this isn't how we die. If you die in one of these things, you make the newspapers. Most of the time, we die from something pretty boring. We die from very fundamental things. We die from organ failure. We die from cancer. It isn't a shock to you. We all have friends that have passed away from this. Probably have loved ones that passed away from this. So essentially, 11 out of 12 of us die from something that's very predictable. I promise this won't be totally morose by the end of it. And if you look at frailty or dementia, if we were to look at what is dementia really, it's nothing but brain failure. It's organ failure of the brain. So when you look at that, 2/3 of us die from organ failure. Roughly 25% of us die from cancer. In other words, it's totally predictable. Completely predictable. Come on in, man. We're just getting started. So the point in this is typically we have ups and downs. I call this dying of the wiggles. We go up, we go down, we go up, we go down, and one of the times we go down, we don't go back up again. That's the natural trajectory for us, but not everybody follows that path. The point is having things prepared in the event that your life starts having some wiggles in them. And you don't know when that's going to happen. Having those documents in place can be critical. And I'll share a story. My son and I were in the middle of New Year's Day dinner at my mom's house. My father had passed away. My mother was 76 years old, incredibly vibrant, had just passed her North Carolina concealed carry class. Good or bad, I was impressed. She asked me what I thought of it. I told her I thought I would call before I showed up unannounced. That was my goal plan. You know, she's armed. Give her a ring. We were doing fine in the course of dinner. She'd actually had some of the neighbor kids over. She'd been reading a book to them, having snacks with them. She'd kind of turned into the local grandmother for the neighborhood. And in the middle of New Year's Day dinner, my mother reaches over, picks up the remote control to the television and said, "I'm not really sure how to make this telephone work." I said, "Well, Mom, it's not a telephone. It's a remote control." She goes, "Oh, silly." And she reached over and picked up the phone. But a moment later, she started saying other things that were unusual. That was at 6:30. At 8:30 that evening, 2 hours later, I was standing in the emergency room at a medical center, which will remain unnamed, but they have a dark blue basketball team and they're in Durham. So we were standing at the Duke ER, having a conversation with an emergency room physician. I had picked up her advance directives on the way out of the house because she had filled them out. She had informed her family about where they were, and they were available. These are key components of this. I picked up her advance directives in a perfunctory manner, knowing that we didn't need them because I thought she had some sort of stomach for it. Put them in my pocket. Found out after a CT scan that she had a massive intracranial bleed, and the odds were she wasn't going to make it through the night. Now, she did, and she recovered. And we used those documents many more times because she had more bleeds. But we were able to make decisions that night. I was able to be a better caretaker to her. And I was also given the freedom of being a son who knew what her wishes were, not the son who was guessing what Mom wanted done. And you don't always have the warning of the wiggles, is my point in all of that. So having those documents prepared, having your healthcare power of attorney informed, and having those documents available so that they can be enforced is critical. And so I share that story as a bit of context for why we need a set of written instructions. And that's really what this is. It's a game plan. When we start talking about advanced directives, we basically break them into two categories. One is a living will, which is the what document, is what I call it. What do you want done? What do you not want done? It's really pretty simple. I want this, I don't want that, or I want this under certain circumstances. And we'll discuss what some of those circumstances are in a minute. The other document is the healthcare power of attorney. It's the who document. If I'm not in charge, who is? Oh, and by the way, who's not? Depending on who your families are and how many folks you've got in them, consensus is not always achievable. Consensus is not always something that is just realistic given how diverse and dispersed our families often are. In my family, there are 4 kids located in 4 states. Well, we can't all come together at Duke at night. We all had to say who's in charge and who's not in charge and who's the backup and who's the backup to the backup. And we can create those through these documents so that you're able to extend your influence and control beyond your ability to speak for yourself. And these documents only come into play if you're unable to speak for yourself. No one can have one of these documents and say, well, I'm going to go request your medical records because I'm your healthcare power of attorney. My wife is my healthcare power of attorney. She can't go get my documents right now. My healthcare records. She can't get those. I have no problems if she did, but the healthcare power of attorney doesn't give her that authority. In the event that I was unable to speak for myself, she has that authority. That's what the document provides. There's a couple significant advantages of them. One of them we just covered. And I say maximum influence. We don't have control. If we had control of it, we would never need the documents to begin with. I've just decided I'll never die. As the guy said, I plan to live forever. So far, so good. A gift of reduced burden, I think, is one of the biggest things. And what I mean by that is if you've ever watched a family struggle to make decisions, and in our work we've seen this, watched a family struggle to make decisions, wondering what someone would want for themselves. And if you have 3 to 4 adults in a room trying to figure out what another adult wants, you'll end up with about 8 opinions as to what people want, because we're all second guessing ourselves. It's human nature. It's not meant to be a criticism. It's just the nature of how we work. And so you're empowering someone to do something for you as opposed to being concerned or doing something to you And that's why we call this the uncomfortable gift. It's not fun to talk about because it requires us to have some pretty uncomfortable self-discussions. If I talk about your mortality, that means I have to talk about mine. If I sit down and talk about the mortality, my mortality with my healthcare power of attorney, they have to stop for a minute and realize, hey, we're only here for a little while. And we've got to make plans. And we've got to make those plans in the best interest, not only of ourselves, but the ones we leave behind. And it doesn't mean that every time you use these documents, you're going to die. It doesn't, very often not the case. I used the documents for my mother for 4 years before she ever passed away because she was unable to speak for herself. But we maintained her health care, actually, and were able to do a pretty good job of that for 4 years, but because she had provided the power to do it. Sometimes it also means that we're going to see things differently, which it's kind of what happens among humans anyway, right? We see things differently. It's part of what makes conversation fun. But it means you may have to address some of those philosophical differences. So there's basically 3 types of these documents. Again, living will, the what document, the healthcare power of attorney, the who's in charge, and conversely, who's not in charge document. And then we're going to touch on these, and these are not ones that you can actually execute yourself, but they're medical advance directives, and they're done in coordination by your physician or nurse practitioner or PA, physician assistant. And we'll talk about those in a moment. You can actually have all 3 of these at one time. And if I go back to that story about my mother, we actually had all 3 of those at one time. And there's a reason for having those, and we'll talk about it. So again, living wills, it's a what document? It's a set of instructions. And I like to think of these instructions in 2 categories. Specifically, I do or do not want these things. The other side of it is a general philosophical guideline to help people understand what you may or may not have wanted. Because the ability for me to write a document today that's going to contemplate every single possible medical decision that could happen 5 years from now is almost impossible. But I can create a document that captures my philosophical perspective on what I would and would not want for myself, and then appoint someone through a healthcare power of attorney whose judgment I trust. Does that make sense? So you don't have to worry about being overly specific. So what does that mean? Well, there's some things to ponder. You know, I was driving down the road. My best friend called me. We've been buddies for 25 years. We're driving down the road. I answer the phone, and he goes, "Hey, Coop, I've been thinking about it, and I don't want to be kept alive on tubes and wires." I said, "Are you having a bad day?" He goes, "No, why do you ask?" That's a strange question, man. I'm driving down the road. You're asking me about tubes and wires. I said, "Did you have a meeting with your doctor?" He goes, "No." He says, "It's just been on my mind a while. I thought I would tell you." I said, "Okay, well, I appreciate you telling me. It's a little more nuanced than tubes and wires, but let's talk about that. That's a good place to start. But before I go into this any further, have you talked to your wife? Because I've known her for 20-some years." And he goes, "Of course not. I don't hunt with her." Now, I don't know if he thinks that I'm going to shoot him. I'm not sure what the deal is on that. I did explain to him that under North Carolina statute, hunting buddy really has no authority whatsoever. It's pretty weak. Is that true? I'm just checking with the attorney in the room. Is the North Carolina Advanced Directive hunting buddy statute? That's one of the things we're going to be pushing for in the next General Assembly. But when we start talking about that, we said, what about artificial hydration? Would you want to have your life extended or your care to involve the use of intravenous through an IV hookup or some sort of tube that would usually run down through your mouth or nose, or possibly through a surgically implanted port in the stomach? Would you want that? Well, I don't know. Well, what do you mean you don't know? Well, under certain circumstances, I might. So here's an example. For me personally, do I want to be kept alive if I had no chance of recovery through that means? For me, I do not. But if I came out of surgery tomorrow for something that was reparable, and because I was going to be unconscious for a couple days while I healed up and y'all worked on me, you'd like to keep me hydrated, why, yes, I would like to be hooked up for a few days, and we'll discontinue that after 2 or 3 days. That's fine. Well, you can contemplate that in this document. And so sometimes it's not binary. Yes, I want IVs. No, I don't. It's under what circumstances and for how long. And again, this goes back to that philosophical guidance piece. It's the exact same conversation for artificial nutrition. Antibiotics at end of life. This one gets a little more controversial for folks because they say, well, would I want antibiotics or not? Sometimes the body at the very end of life is no longer able to resist infection, and that's just a natural course of the body declining. Sometimes, however, that infection's causing pain, and you may want some to be treated with antibiotics, not because you're trying to cure anything, but because you simply want to ameliorate the symptoms associated with the infection. Does that make sense? This is a more nuanced discussion than a simple, yes, I want it, or no, I don't. And I really encourage folks to think about this because in order to fill out the documents, in order to have an informed conversation with a healthcare power of attorney, it helps to have really done some reflection. And this is the uncomfortable part. I've got to sit around and think about all the miserable ways I might die. However, it won't go away because we don't think about it. We can make it better because we do. Comfort measures. I know some people who want no comfort measures. They believe that suffering and pain at the end of life are part of a spiritual purification. Pain such as having large noises in the room with you. No. So, other people say, look, I don't want to hurt. There's nothing gained by hurting. You don't get any wings in heaven for grimacing. Fine. Resuscitation efforts. This one gets interesting for folks. I want resuscitation or not. I watched TV the other night. A guy fell over on the show. They did CPR on him. 20 minutes later, he was drinking coffee in the ER. I've never seen that in real life. So what happens with CPR is that you're returned to the state you were, hopefully, moments before you stop breathing and your heart stopped working. So if you're a 37-year-old athlete whose heart trips out while you're on the treadmill at the gym and they bring you back, you're probably okay. But if you were slowly dying of the wiggles, the moment that they bring you back to is the moment right before you died. It wasn't anything in particular. So you really need to think as to whether or not you want DNRs, whether you want CPR, rather. And to put this in context, we actually do have people who are full codes in hospice. About 10 years ago, we were asked to review all of our medical records. We went back 7 years, reviewed our medical records to see if how successful CPR had been on hospice patients. After we reviewed every single instance, we couldn't find one single patient that had been resuscitated by CPR because their entire body was dying. There's no way to bring them back. So again, things to consider. The use of medical devices. Would you want an external heart? Would you want dialysis? Under what circumstances? For how long? So those are things to consider. So that when you start thinking about the what piece of care, that's something to hold in mind. Let's switch over to the who document. The who's going to be in charge and who's not going to. Now there is a statute. It does not reference hunting buddies, if I recall. But there is a statute that says if you die without a healthcare power of attorney, these people are in the queue and in what order to make decisions on your behalf. However, that statute may not reflect your wishes. So I encourage you to have a document that details who you want, and if that person's not available, who else you want. And I encourage you to go 3 people deep. Who's in charge behind that one, and who's in charge behind that one. If you've got 3 people deep, you're probably bomb-proof if it comes to having a healthcare power of attorney. The reality is we have a traveling society. We have people who are dispersed. You may need to have more than one person who's available to you in case one of them's not available. Does that resonate? So you'll hear this called a healthcare surrogate, healthcare proxy, durable power of attorney for healthcare. If you're from other states, it runs under different names. But I believe that of the two documents, I personally believe this one is the most important. Now, not everybody's going to agree with that, and they're probably right. I'm usually wrong. But I believe that having an advocate appointed who knows your wishes and can speak on your behalf is one of the most critical things you can do. You're not giving up control. You're ensuring control beyond your ability to speak. And this doesn't give them the authority to go deal with money. Now, there are some nuances to durable power of attorneys where there may be language in a durable power of attorney that could influence this. That is a very nuanced legal discussion. I encourage you to sit down with an attorney to do that. And by the way, I'm not one, which Jackie is and I'm not, so why aren't you up doing this? So one of the things that we want to talk about in here is a very sophisticated healthcare term called moxie. We don't use that word much anymore, but whoever you're going to appoint to be your healthcare power of attorney ought to have moxie. They've got to be willing to put your wishes, maybe even ahead of their own, your wishes ahead of somebody else's wishes for you. They may have to put your wishes ahead of the wishes or preferences of a medical provider and say, we're going to do this. An example is about 2 o'clock one morning, I was having a conversation with a nurse regarding my mother's desire not to have artificial nutrition. And so, it was a ventilator, artificial breathing. And the nurse heard what we were discussing, and she said, well, are those your wishes? And my response to her was, well, who cares? They're not my wishes. They're her wishes. Now, I happen to agree with them, but we're discussing her care and her wishes, which were captured in these two documents. And the point of that is to refocus the conversation on why we're in the room. It's to take care of you in the future by you taking action now. Now, one of the documents that is commonly used for this is the 5 Wishes document. It's accepted in, I believe, 42 states in the District of Columbia. One of those states is North Carolina. There are a couple of simplified North Carolina documents that you can use. But if that more nuanced discussion that I've referenced today resonates with you, where you go, wow, I think I would like to have a little more sophisticated discussion, I would encourage you to sit down with an attorney. If you say, no, I think this is really straightforward, really simple, there are free documents to use. You're welcome to use them. We have some copies today. What I tell folks is whatever you do, we're not going to argue over which one you have, but for Pete's sake, have one. Always have one of these documents. That's what they look like. I think Lisa's got some here, or she may have some with her. So let's talk for a second. Whether you sit down with an attorney or you use one of these documents, you've signed this document. So what do I do now? For Pete's sake, please don't go take it to the bank and put it in the safety deposit box, because you can't get it out most of the time. The bank is closed more than they're open. And so you need this document where you can reach it. No one can do anything to you by having it. The only person on the planet, people on the planet that it's meaningful to are you, your healthcare power of attorney. So no one else can use it anyway. If someone steals it, too bad, make another one. But make copies of them. Make sure your healthcare power of attorney has them. Make sure the second person and the third person has them. And if you have a large family, I encourage folks to sit down and say, look, this is who I put in charge. You're going to take care of me, right? Okay. This is who I put in charge. Please do a good job. That's all I'm asking. I don't want to put you on the spot or anything, but okay. But who's in charge? And this is what I've asked them to do. And here's the documentation I've given them. I want y'all to have it too, because I want you to know who's in charge. And I want you to know what my wishes are. So don't get mad at her. If you don't like what I've decided, y'all get mad at me. And y'all can come holler at my gravestone if you want to. Does that make sense? So make sure your healthcare providers have it. Give it to the medical director. So the medical providers, give one to your doctor. You have 3 doctors, give it to all 3 of them. You have a primary hospital you go to, give it to that. If you're not sure what else to do with one, throw it in the glove box. It won't hurt anything. So if you're working with a hospital, a nursing home, assisted living, if you're here at Morningside, put a copy here. Put it in the medical record. Let them scan it in. Put a copy at your house. There's nothing wrong with doing that. Well, what happens if you ever change your mind? Well, the reality is you are going to change your mind. Now, I was a D student. I'm not going to make any argument about it. I worked pretty hard to get my Ds. I didn't get too many of them, but I got a couple of them here and there. Wow. So every 10 years, and this is actually, I stole this shamelessly from the American Bar Association, who actually has a great toolkit online if you want to look at something to stimulate discussion with. This is a good one. Every 10 years, look at it. If you get a divorce, usually your ex-spouse is precluded from doing it, but if you've ever had an ex-spouse, think about that a minute. I'm just saying, you're looking down, you don't feel well, you look down the foot of your bed, and there's your ex-spouse going, this is going to be fun. I've actually signed you up for a colonoscopy tomorrow. You're going to love this. If you've had a death of a loved one, and this is for two reasons. Let's go. This one's air conditioning. All right. There's two reasons for this. One, the person that died may have been your healthcare power of attorney or one of those folks. The other is very often when we lose someone, it's a time when we step back and reflect upon our own wishes. And it may cause you to revisit certain elements of your own plan. And if that's the case, change your plan. It's not a big deal. So if you've death, divorce, decade, you get a new diagnosis, you think you're going to get a case of the wiggles, probably a good time to think about it. Be sure everything's okay. And that really, a new diagnosis is very similar to getting some sort of decline in your health care. So if any of those 5 Ds apply, it's a good time to review those documents. Again, the most current one is the one that matters. So you're going to get them signed, witnessed in North Carolina by 2 folks and a notary. North Carolina is a tough state to do these in. We're trying to make that easier, but that's an uphill battle on Jones Street. But anytime you have a new one, whoever you gave them to last time, give them a new one. And if since then you've got some new family members or you've got a new doctor, give them a copy too. You want everybody to have the most current stuff. Now let's talk about that DNR form for a minute. DNR simply stands for Do Not Resuscitate. By the way, if you've ever seen them, they look like this. They call that goldenrod. I call that yellow. It's all where you're from. But do not resuscitate, do not attempt to resuscitate. It's nuanced, it doesn't matter. The point of these is these are only for folks that typically have serious illness. They are signed by a physician, a nurse practitioner, or a physician's assistant. And you'll usually see them hanging above the bed on the refrigerator in the home. And what it is, it has a giant stop sign on it. It's the notice to people in a healthcare facility or to the emergency responders who come to your home. Don't do CPR. That's all it says. It's not a discussion of your living will. It's not a discussion of your healthcare power of attorney. It's a pre-written medical order that says, don't do CPR on this person. End of story. That's all it does. So let's talk about a document that's a little more sophisticated. That's called the MOST form, Medical Order for Scope of Treatment. The MOST form. If you've ever lived in other states, sometimes they're called COLST or POST forms, clinical orders for life-sustaining treatment, whatever. The concept of it is the same. It doesn't matter. It's done in coordination with your healthcare provider, again, signed by a doctor, an NP or PA. And the difference on this one is it's a little more nuanced in that it talks about, remember that list before we talked about IVs, we talked about nutrition, we talked about antibiotics? Every bit of that is captured on this document in these sections right here. It's a 5-section document. These top 4 sections cover every bit of those. Filled out ahead of time with your physician and goes in the medical record. If you're here at this facility and then you move to the hospital, the document should travel with you. If you lose it, make another one. It's not a big deal. It's not like you lost the keys to the kingdom. But these are pre-written physician orders. What I am going to suggest to you, though, is that this document needs to mirror the living will. It doesn't have to. There's a way to get past it. But philosophically, what you're asking of your doctor and what you're asking of your physician or your healthcare power of attorney should be the same thing. And if they're not, probably need to address the conflict. Why do I want one thing with one person and another with another? Probably worth figuring out. So, everybody jump up, rush out, find a lawyer, right? Oh, there's one. Everybody jump up and get one of these things filled out. My call to action in doing these, we do these presentations actually across about a 7 or 8 county area. And we have several folks at our organization that do them. If you want something like this at your faith community or a civic group or a book club, let us know. We do them. We'll provide the documents. We'll talk folks through it. We have no financial incentive in this is strictly an education piece. As a nonprofit, we try and push a lot of things back into our community. This is one of the educational pieces we do. Ask that you encourage other people to have these documents. There's an awful lot of upside. And as far as I can tell, it's about as risk-free a document or set of documents as you can ever have. So that's the whole shebang, folks. Are there any questions, thoughts, general concerns, wishes that you had somebody besides from Alabama talking to you? That is where I grew up. Sorry. I always give the state a hard time, but I pull for them in football, I can tell you that. Do y'all have these documents? I'm putting everybody on the spot. You've got these documents. You think you need to review them? Well, and that's a good spot to be. I mean, I've seen people rush into them too fast, and I'm like, think about this a minute. These are the directions that are going to impact how you are treated as a person. Think about this for a minute. I'm not saying perseverate and then don't do something, but enter into this and understanding you're writing a game plan and you're hiring a coach to execute that game plan for some point in the future. Probably worth getting right. I laugh. My wife and I were at Lowe's, and there was a couple in there looking at appliances. I don't know anything else about their relationship, but what I can tell you is they both are very passionate about dishwashers. Which up until that moment, I thought a dishwasher washed dishes. But apparently it does a lot more than that, and it's very meaningful in their relationship. I'm not sure they're still married, having finished their shopping trip. And I was wondering, I wonder if they've had the same level of discussion about literally life and death decisions as they have had about a dishwasher. I'm betting you they have. I did not discuss it with them at the time. It just seemed out of place. But anyway. The question was, can we share a story of things done well and conversely things not done well when the documents are in place? When things are done well, it looks like the documents don't exist, in my opinion. What I mean by that is everybody's already informed of what's in them, and the focus is then not on the documents at all. At that point, the focus is on being loved ones and taking care of somebody you love, and either getting them back to where they can speak on their own and take care of themselves and express their own wishes, or if they're not going to recover, spending those precious time with them until they're no longer with us. And so it removes the distraction, if you will, of healthcare decisions. You know, the worst time in the world it's hard. These are hard decisions to begin with. But if you think they're hard to talk about now, wait till it's 3 o'clock in the morning. You've got 5 people who are sleep deprived in a strange place in a hospital trying to make these decisions. And that doesn't go well. That's what it looks like when it's at the wrong level. We've seen it to the point in our hospice home where we've literally had to walk into families and say, guys, y'all have 30 seconds before we call the police. Because we're open to a vigorous discussion, but we're not open to a barroom brawl in our healthcare facility because we have seen things erupt to that point. And the most concerning piece in my mind for that is not what happens in that moment. What happens 2 weeks later? Because now they've had a loss in that family, and that family's probably not coming back together. And they may have lost a grandmother or a mother, but more than likely they've also lost some siblings or some aunts or uncles. And what we begin to see is such a fracture in a family, the family may never recover from it. I much prefer to see everybody on the same page, even if they're not in agreement with what that person wanted, just respecting their wishes and saying, they wanted absolutely everything done. We often think about this like, I don't want stuff done. In reality, some people say in their living will, I want everything done. And if it looks like it's not going to get better, I want you to give me a cigarette and a shot of bourbon. Fine. It's not my life. Capture it. Write it down. Our healthcare system tends to default to maximum care. Part of that's because there's no do-overs. Part of that's because people are scared not to, medically. They don't want to be accused of not doing everything possible. But as one doctor told me years ago, there's a difference between is there anything else I can do and is there anything else I can do useful? And those are two different conversations medically. So I hope that answers your question. And the question is, if there's a change in the physician, do the most forms and DNR forms need to be updated? I would encourage you to do that for two reasons. One is that you have the document then is signed by your attending physician. The other is it is a mechanism to ensure that your new physician understands your wishes. Not his or her wishes, your wishes. And it really, that document, in particular the most form, I believe is an incredibly useful document just for helping to navigate the discussion of what I do and don't want done. That's why I like the most form so much more than the DNR. The DNR is yes or no to CPR. Well, man, there's a whole lot of life besides yes or no to CPR. The most form does have that. It includes the CPR, but includes that discussion about artificial hydration, nutrition, antibiotics, even whether or not I'd want to go to the hospital under certain circumstances, what I'd want as far as pain and comfort. All of that is captured in literally a front and back piece of paper. And for folks that have an advanced illness, I don't have a most form. I don't feel like medically I need one. But for people who have an advanced illness or a pretty serious illness, I think it's a great document to have in place. And it needs to be revisited with folks. And particularly if you say, you know what, I've changed my mind. Well, go tell that doctor you've changed your mind and let's update that form. The question is, how do doctors actually, the real life practice of medicine, interplay with these documents? I believe that there has been a shift in the last several years between physicians who are more in the traditional mindset of you lay the accelerator on the floor and you do absolutely everything to the last screaming minute, which is some people's wishes, and the doctors will execute that. But we've seen, frankly, great acceptance and relief by physicians when they walk into a room and someone says, here are my wishes, here's what I want, here's what I don't want, here's who's in charge. Because as a physician, there's no guesswork now. You're putting them in a more stable practice environment because you're taking some of the ambiguity out. You've told me what you want. You've written it down. Who am I to argue? And you've told me who can make decisions. And so it doesn't mean that there will never be conflict. It doesn't mean that there will never be people who disagree or that all medical providers will agree. But overwhelmingly, we have found this to be a very smooth process, that physicians are accepting of it. I know of only a couple of occasions where a physician said, but that's not what I want for this person. And the family member said, well, okay, well, that's what they want for themselves, and they're the ones getting care, and they're the patient, and they documented it, and I think we're through talking about this. and sometimes a physician may say, I'm not comfortable doing it, I think you may need another doctor. They have the right to bow out. That is incredibly rare. Incredibly rare. We see all this TV drama. That stuff rarely ever happens. The reason that names like Terry Schiavo or Nancy Quinlan or those names come to mind is because they were dramatic, they were not well documented, and they created the case law that has evolved to where we are now. What we see now is incredibly low drama, and doctors are embracing of this. And hospitals are asking for it. I mean, one of the key questions that they're supposed to ask on admission, do you have advanced directives? Yes, can I have a copy? And they want to scan them into the medical record. And I have historically, with my family members, given them about a day. And then when I'm up there and things are kind of quiet, if I'm at the hospital, I'll say, hey, do you mind to pull up their medical records, their advanced directives in the medical record? Because I want to know they're in there. It's just my way of making sure that they're there. Well, you know, a boss of mine years ago said, people will try hard to do what you expect, and they're absolutely going to do what you inspect. And so sometimes you go up to the hospital and you inspect, or at the nursing home and you inspect. Not that you're trying to catch anybody, but because you're trying to ensure that the person that you're there for is getting what they needed, and you're also ensuring your own peace of mind. Is that? If y'all have any questions, or let me know. Are y'all comfortable? All right. Well, then thank you for your time, and I hope y'all have a good Friday. It is still Friday, right? It wasn't that long a presentation. Whew. Thank you. I appreciate it. Is this a skilled facility, like a nursing home or an assisted living? Skilled nursing facility. It just helps me to understand context. So the hospice benefit is structured by federal law to be 180 days long. That doesn't mean it can't go beyond that. The caveat to the 180 days is the language that says, assuming the disease follows its normal course. So there's often this concern, well, we're going to call them in way too early. We don't need to call hospice in yet. So we're talking about a 6-month benefit. 50% of patients die in 3 weeks. 35% die in 1 week. Doesn't sound like we're at any risk of using it too long. We all know a few stories where somebody said, oh, they're going to be dead in a year, and 6 years later they're still playing golf. The reason we know those stories is kind of like those shark attacks and those bear attacks. They're the odd ducks that stand out. Medically, we overestimate. And that's awesome. God bless him. I intend to beat them too. I'm not really doing a lot of things to help me in that phase from a lifestyle choice, but I would like to beat them. I encourage folks to call early. There's no penalty. Worst case scenario, we call it graduating from hospice. You no longer appear to be declining. You don't appear that you're going to start declining. And so, actually, I'll go back to my mom. We graduated my mother at one point out of hospice care. We took her into our care, and trust me, it's my mother going to the organization where I work. I went into this with great solemnity. However, we got into this thing about 2 months, and I realized she had taken a recovery route that none of us had anticipated. Awesome. That's great. So we graduated her, because it sounds better than saying, well, we're going to flunk you out of hospice for non-performance. I mean, so we call it, we're graduating you. There's a fear, well, then I can't get back into hospice. You absolutely can. You can come back in. You know, we make predictions, but we're not fortune tellers. Physicians are asked to predict, but they're not there to schedule. They don't know. And so we take our best guess. And unfortunately now, so many people come into hospice late because they say, well, hospice is for the last few days of life. If it's there longer, we're able to do more. And Jackie mentioned this earlier. The studies are showing that for, frankly, a broad number of illnesses, patients who go into hospice live longer than those who were treated. Well, why is that? Because we're treating them to death. Literally. There comes a point that we can't beat the disease. And unintentionally, we're just beating the body. Does that make sense? And so if we can't beat the disease, then let's stop punishing the body that the disease is already present in. And get that person to where they're not nauseous, and they're not in pain, and they're supported. And if I'm able to eat, and I can have a quality of life, and I'm enjoying the people I'm around, I'm probably going to live longer. I'm still going to deal with this disease. It doesn't mean that these people live forever. But the average number that came out of that study was these folks lived an average of 28 days longer. 4 weeks. 4 weeks longer. We have 10% of patients that come into our care who die the same day. They were on death's door when our phone rang. It limits our ability to do a whole lot of good because it's not so much treatment as it is a race at that point, just trying to get out there. And so if we can be brought in, we can do a good job. At our organization, all of our doctors are board certified in hospice and palliative medicine. This is not a moonlight job for them. This is their professional passion. And our staff is available 24/7. They're on electronic medical records everywhere they go. It's high tech and it's high touch at the same time. And the idea is that we're there to embrace a family no matter when, no matter where. And we don't care if they have insurance or not. We were actually founded before there was a Medicare or Medicaid benefit. And the gentleman that founded us is still on our board. I had a meeting last week, and I will tell you there's a high degree of accountability when you sit down for a strategic planning meeting 38 years after the organization was founded, and the gentleman that founded you is sitting across the table looking at you, you think you might ought to get this right. If that makes sense. And so that's Transitions LifeCare, what used to be called Hospice of Wake County.
And is that in a facility, or do you provide care in homes as well?
We do both. We have a facility and we're in the process of expanding it now. But we do 95% of our care not in our building. It may be in an assisted living such as Morningside. It may be in a nursing home like you referenced, or it may be in a private home. The reason is the number one thing people tell us after they're in hospice is, I want to be at home. The number one thing families tell us after someone dies is, we wish we'd done that sooner. And so being at home is the number one thing. When was the last time you talked to somebody that said, I'd like to die in a strange place surrounded by strange people if you don't mind. And if you could make it loud, that'd be awesome. Oh, and can you make the food bad? Sorry. Boy, I forgot to mention that. So folks want to be at home. And they like their recliner. They like their dog. They like the sounds of their neighbor. Sometimes. But they want to stay home, and so we do most of our care there. If you think of our hospice home, think of it as the ICU for hospice. For patients that are so acutely ill with such great symptoms that we just can't keep them comfortable at home. In that case, we move them to our facility where they have RNs, doctors, nurse practitioners, social workers, aid care. We can do IV antibiotics. We have in-wall oxygen. It's like a miniature hospital. And our job is to get people comfortable. And either they get comfortable and they pass away, or they get comfortable and they go home. About 40% of the people that we put into our hospice home then go somewhere else. Because we get their symptoms under control. Where'd they say they wanted to be? Home. We better get them home. And so our goal is to get you comfortable and get you home if you get there. And
You do a lot to make it feel like a home as well. We've never seen it. It has a living room and
it does.
kitchen facility that families can come and use to have family time together. It really is an amazing facility that's available to the community.
There is a family kitchen. People say, well, does that mean I can bake brownies in it? Yes, and just as a point of record, nurses love brownies. So if you're making it, it's okay to double the batch. There's 2 racks in the oven, is all I'm saying. I appreciate y'all's time, and we'll be here. And Lisa is always a resource. She's been very quiet in this meeting, but I have the privilege of working with her. She's exceptional, and I've had the privilege of serving with Jackie in some community functions. She's exceptional as well. So y'all are in great company today, and I've enjoyed being with you. Thank you.